General purpose knives. This is what I would call a general purpose knife. Okay, you get a couple of different kinds of variations of these small sheath knives. They're usually incredibly cheap. This one happens to be from the company Bushware. They call it the Bush knife, and it's very similar or a bit of a copy of the Mora knife. Mora knives are world renowned and well known in the bushcraft community as being a very cheap and very practical knife, and so this is basically a Mora knife, but it's actually a little bit cheaper than the Mora knife. I think I paid something like £9 for this knife, and the reason I want to talk about this kind of knife, not necessarily this brand, but a knife like this, is a lot of people ask, what kind of knife should I take if I'm doing something? There's always a sort of, what kind of knife do I need if I'm doing something? Is there a general purpose knife? Is there a knife to suit all needs? The answer to that is no, of course not. Nothing really suits all needs. But if you were going to roll the dice and say, look, I need a knife that I think is going to be adequate enough for most of the situations that I'm going to find myself in the world, regardless of what that would be, I would say this is the kind of knife that you should be looking to get. Stainless steel. I would recommend going with stainless steel over carbon steel, because stainless steel, although it's a little bit harder to sharpen and it's not quite as good as carbon steel from a strength point of view, it is a lot more forgiving in things like salt water or high moisture areas. It's easier to maintain a stainless steel blade than it is a carbon steel blade, or an 01 tool type steel blade. Now, a knife like this, even though this knife costs less than £10, it's an incredibly practical knife. It has a solid stainless steel blade. It's not going to break unless you did something really ridiculous with it. It's incredibly sharp. They always come pretty sharp out of the factory, and once you put a little bit more of an edge on them, they hold that edge for a long time, and they're fairly useful. They usually come with a plastic or rubber handle, which is good. It's not full tang. They usually only go up to about here or whatever. This one happens to have a sort of metal guard there, which is quite nice. And I would go for a brightly coloured one. So orange or some other luminous type colour is a good thing to have. If you are interested in something like sailing or boating, a knife like this adding to your kit would be a good idea. I would, however, probably drill a small hole in the handle, and then I would put a small lanyard on it, and then I would put a floaty on it, so that if you drop this in the water it would float as opposed to sink straight to the bottom, which I think this probably would. If you're a hiker and you think you may need a knife on a hiking trip, a knife like this is not too large, it's very cheap, it doesn't take up a lot of room. You can slip this down the side of a backpack, keep it in your pocket, and it's accessible and easy to get to. They almost always come with a drain hole and a hard plastic cheap sheath, but they're always super solid, these things. I've never broken one of these things. They're just so solid. You can attach it to your belt or whatever, but in reality, a blade like this is the kind of knife that I keep in some of my packs as a secondary sort of I know I've got it type knife. If I go on a fishing trip, this is the knife I take. If I go on a random day trip that I'm not going to be doing any kind of bushcraft, any kind of survival whatsoever, this is the knife I take. Leathermans and things like that, multi-tools, some people say are good items to have, and they are. I've got some good Leathermans, but they're much heavier, and they're you're basically carrying around a bunch of tools that basically you use two of, or maybe even one of in my case. I mean, I use the pliers and use the knife on the Leatherman. I don't use anything else on a Leatherman. So if you just need a cutting implement, a general purpose knife, purchase a brightly coloured stainless steel small knife like this. You can get this one from Bushware, bushware.co.uk. Buy a lot of stuff from them. I'm not sponsored by them. I don't have any affiliation with them, but they do sell quite good like stalking and hunting equipment and things like that, and some decent clothing. And they also obviously do their own little knives and things like that. Or the tried and tested Mora knife, which I've got several of those. Mora stainless steel is a very good knife, which I'll show you comparison. So you can see here, this is a Mora stainless steel knife, and this is the Bush knife from Bushware stainless steel. Very similar in construction, very similar in weight. This one has the metal guard, this one hasn't. This one has a more grippy type rubbery feel to it. This one is a little bit more, it has a more textured rubber, but it feels cheaper than this. But this is a £10 knife, or it was when I purchased it, and this one I think cost about £15, maybe a little bit less. This one's made in Sweden. It doesn't say where this one's made, but I'd be willing to bet that it's probably made in China or something. But that doesn't mean it's a worse knife, it just means, you know, it's got some cheaper manufacturing. But as you can see, very similar knife, both drop point, both Scandi type knives. You can use these kind of knives for most bushcraft tools. You can use these to do things like baton logs, a little bit of carving, but to me it's a general purpose survivalist knife. I use this one a lot when I go fishing, gut fish with it, cut line with it. It's nice and easy to see, it's nice and bright, not a problem. If I was on a sailboat, this is the kind of knife I would take, but I'd make sure it would float.